Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Econ 210 lectures on the macroeconomics. In the rest of the semester, we are going to study different aspects of macroeconomics. And first, we are going to start with the definition of macroeconomics and what we study in macroeconomics and what is consistent in the study of macroeconomics. All right, initially we are going to start discussing the history of macroeconomics, and there are two main schools of thought, the classicals and the Keynesians. We are going to look into differences between those two schools of thought. We are going to talk about economic growth, and we are going to also talk about business cycles. And in doing so, we are going to also refer to unemployment and how we define unemployment and how it is related to business cycles. All right. First of all, macroeconomics studies the problems that affect the economy and the society as a whole. Unlike microeconomics, in which you studied the individual markets, the behavior in individual markets, demand and supply in individual markets, you also studied individual behavior with respect to consumers and firms. But in macroeconomics, we study the reasons and the consequences of economic growth. We study the downturns and upturns, such as recessions and recoveries, and also the reasons and the consequences of these actions. We talk about unemployment, we talk about inflation, again, the reasons and the consequences of unemployment and inflation. So we also look into what can be done about these problems through government policy. What can be the remedies to these problems through government policy? Now, of course, like in any other profession in macroeconomics, there are different views, and throughout the history, throughout time, different economists during different periods in history had different views and perspectives about the macroeconomy. There has always been debates about what should be the appropriate macroeconomic policy to remedy these problems that we mentioned, the lack of economic growth, recessions, unemployment, and inflation. So in order to understand the nature of these debates, let's have a look at briefly the historical development of macroeconomics. First, we start with the classical economists, going all the way back to Adam Smith. They believed that through the market forces, through free market forces in the long run, the economy would always produce at its potential or its full employment level of output. We are going to talk about what this full employment level of output is. So it's basically the potential output level of the economy, where the economic actors are fully allocating and the resources to their full efficiency. So in the long run, the classicals believed that with self-regulating characteristic of the free markets, the competitive markets, the short-run problems would not be important. They would disappear in the long run. But with the Great Depression that started in 1929 in the United States and which spilled over to the rest of the world, unemployment became a permanent problem which could not be remedied easily. According to the classicals, they said that, okay, the unemployment problem is there because there are impediments to the competitive behavior of the labor markets. And this problem is basically the existence of the labor unions, because the labor unions do not allow for the smooth working of the competitive markets. Which is also, impeding the markets or not allowing the markets to work to their full efficiency. So according to the classicals at the time, the remedy was to abolish labor unions. But on the other hand, the Keynesians, which of course appeared with John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s, they started to think about what can be done to eliminate the short-run problems rather than looking at the economy in the long run. They said that we should not wait for the problems to disappear through the self-regulating behavior of the competitive markets. Actually, the government should take active policy to eliminate the problems that appear in the short run. There is a famous quote by John Maynard Keynes. He says that we are all dead in the long run, so we don't really, know how long the long run is going to take. According to the classical economists in that view, the business cycles that we are going to explain in a minute, or the ups and downs in the economy, are temporary occurrences, and the government should not do anything to intervene in the economy. The markets will eventually correct themselves. But the Keynesians say that, all right, that something should be done about these business cycles, and the government should intervene through certain policies, such as monetary policies and fiscal policies, which we will be talking about in the rest of the semester, to correct these problems. So according to the Keynesians, government should find a way to remedy, for example, the recession problem. According to the Keynesians, recessions or the downturns in the economy, which are prolonged, they take 3-4 years. So the economy constantly will be growing at slow rates or even be contracting during recessions. According to the Keynesians, recessions are a problem due to the lack of aggregate demand in the economy. Therefore, the firms will not be producing up to their potential due to lack of demand. So according to the Keynesians, this is an example of how to fix the recessionary problem. The government should create new demand, either through incentivizing the firms and the consumers, or even creating demand itself through government spending. Okay, so according to the Keynesians, the government should find ways to uphold aggregate demand so that higher will be supplied to meet the demand, and therefore higher income will be generated, as we will talk about in the macroeconomy. But of course, over time, the distinction between classicals and the Keynesians started to disappear. And in the 1980s, the classicals and the Keynesians merged into a new conventional macroeconomics, which we call the new Keynesian economics. Also, the strict distinction between the microeconomics and macroeconomics also started to disappear during these times in the 1980s with the incorporation of microeconomic perspective into the macroeconomy. So in the current time, right, currently, in the macroeconomic models that we study, we also have the optimizing consumer behavior together with optimizing firm behavior. We cannot think of a macroeconomy without the optimizing behavior of these individual economic actors. So over time, right, everything, all of these different schools of thought or different perspectives converge to each other to tell a more holistic story. Now, nevertheless, I mean, we still think about the economy in different perspectives. Actually, that would be long run, medium run, and the short run. But here, in order to be more concise, we have two frameworks, the long run framework and the short run framework. And the long run framework focuses on the aggregate supply, how it is created and how it can be enlarged and how it can be grown through time. This is also sometimes called the supply side economics and the issues of growth, the determinants of growth, you know, such as how can we increase the stock of capital in the economy, or even how can we increase the human capital in the economy, how can we increase the technology level in an economy, right? These are all going to be sources of growth in the long run. So these issues are all considered to be long run problems. On the other hand, in the short run, we are concerned with the business cycles. And these business cycles and the short run framework of an economy is usually concentrated on the demand side of an economy, right? This is also sometimes called the demand side economics, and business cycles are considered to be within the short run framework of an economy. So from the classical's point of view, actually the long run economics or the long run framework of an economy is dealing with how can we increase the potential of an economy, how can we increase productive efficiency in the economy, and right, how can we start technological progress, or how can we advance technological progress, how can we increase the human capital through education, right? These are all related to the productive efficiency of an economy, which is likely to increase potential output. On the other hand, the business cycle or the short-run framework focuses on the determinants of aggregate demand. How can we correct business cycles through demand-side policies, okay, such as how can we motivate consumers and firms to spend more so that the economy will be motivated to produce more to meet the demand, or how can the government apply demand-side policies such as fiscal policies affecting government spending and taxation, and also monetary policy, right? So these are all related to the short run of an economy studied in the short run framework of an economy. Now, inflation, which again we are going to talk about in the next chapter. Inflation, which is the rise in the sustained rise in the prices over time and unemployment, people wanting to work, not finding works, fall within both frameworks. So you can have inflation in the long run or in the short run, and what are the reasons and consequences of that, or you can have prolonged unemployment, or you can have cyclical unemployment only through a business cycle. So, I mean, now we know that there is not a definite line. So you cannot say so many months is a short-run period. After so many months or years, you turn into a long-run economy. There is nothing like that. There's this smooth time framework, you can say. Actually, the economy can be simultaneously in the long run as well as in the short run. So both frameworks, the long run framework and the short run framework, can be blended into a composite framework in which both supply and demand forces are effective. So, all right, so from here, let's move on to discussing economic growth. Now, again, as we will see in the next chapter, the growth rate of an economy is measured by the rate of change, the annual growth rate of the real GDP of an economy, or the real income of an economy, or the value of real output in the economy. Okay, so basically that's what we call the GDP, or the gross domestic product of an economy. Okay, so here the growth rate of an economy is measured by the annual growth rate of real GDP. So it tells you how the productive potential of an economy changes through time. So here, as you see, the average rate of growth in the world, as shown by the purple block here, it has been around 2% per year over a long period of time. Actually, since the 1950s or so, the world economy has grown at about 2%, maybe a little bit less than 2%, 1.8% over the years. And here you see different experiences by different countries. And now what is striking here is China, the gray line here, as you see, the highest one since the 1990s. China, coming out of a socialist economy in the 1980s, has grown on average at 9.9% since the 1980s. Okay, but nevertheless, the rate of growth has been declining recently in the last 5-6 years, down to about 7.5%. But nevertheless, China still is the fastest growing economy of the world, which puts her at the second position in terms of the largest economy in the world. Of course, the largest economy in the world is the United States economy, which has grown at about, if you look at it a more secular pattern over 100 years, 150 years, the US economy has grown at about 2.5%. But as you see lately, the US economy has been experiencing a faster growth. Nevertheless, the other countries of the world, Eastern European countries, Western European countries, Japan, India has shown a fast growth. Nevertheless, in the 70s or in the 80s later on, also, Western European economies have shown, on average, a growth rate of about 2% over the years. they have not really changed their position in the world too much. But what is remarkable here, of course, is Chinese experience. Another important thing here we need to mention is the African countries' experiences. The African countries have always grown at a growth rate slower than the world average growth rate. For example, also here in 81 to 90 period, in the 1980s, the African countries have actually contracted with negative growth. Okay, so there are different experiences around the world, and the economic growth, framework or the economic growth field actually studies why there are these differences. Okay, why are some countries growing fast while others are staying behind? And the main question is, why are some countries rich while others are poor, while some others are poor? Okay, so that's a very relevant and basic question. We can also apply it within an economy, within the country. Why are some regions growing faster than the others, while others are remaining or staying behind? Okay, so you can apply these comparisons or these issues to within an economy, to within a country. Okay, so the goal will always be to increase the potential output, or how can the country increase the efficiency by which it uses the available resources or the factors of production. Okay, so what we mean by potential output, it is the highest amount of output that an economy can produce and sell using existing production processes and resources. So the goal or the objective of the country should be always to increase this potential. Okay, so and that will happen again through more efficient use of resources, which will be happening with an increase in the factor productivity, which might come through, for example, a technological progress, or it can come through an increase in human capital, so on and so forth. Okay, so the more you know, it means the more you are educated, the more you will know how to use the available resources to their fullest efficiency. Okay, so the goal of the economy should always be to improve the potential output. So when we look at the world averages, you can say that in the world, this potential has been, so it is also related to the trend of the growth. Okay, so it is also related to over the long run, how does the economy grow? So if you look at the long run patterns, the world has grown at about 2%, as we said. The US economy has grown at about, again, 2.5% to 3.5%. Now, when you look at the Turkish economy since the 1950s or so, the Turkish economy has grown at a rate similar to the world average growth rate. So in that sense, the Turkish economy really has not done worse or much better than the average country of the world. Okay, so the Turkish economy has grown at about 2% per year since the 1950s or so. Okay, so I mean, with respect to Turkey's position, economic position in the world, you can say that she has not done worse than the average and has not done much better than the average. So the potential output in Turkey has grown at about 2% per year in the long run. Now, this is, I mean, this growth rate is considering the real GDP in aggregate, But of course, when we study the standards of living or the well-being of individuals in an economy, we also want to resort to this per capita GDP or per capita output or per capita income, which is the aggregate output or GDP divided by the total population, the number of people living in that country. So in that sense, the standards of living or the welfare of the individuals will be measured through the increase in the per capita output or per capita GDP. So even if you have increasing total output or even if you have increasing GDP, the population may be growing faster than that, which will mean that per capita output will be declining. So when the population is growing, you need an increase in the real output at a higher rate than the population growth rate. So, for example, if the population is growing at 1% per year, and the economy is growing at 3% per year in real terms, the per capita growth will be 2%. Okay, so it means that the standards of living of individuals or the well-being of individuals will be increasing at 2% rather than all the way to 3%, because the number of people in the population is also increasing by 1%. All right, now, having talked about growth, which we usually consider to be, a long-run occurrence, we can also talk about the business cycles. Now, what is a business cycle? It is the upward or downward movement of economic activity that occurs around the growth trend, around the long-run growth trend of an economy. So it is the upward or downward movement in real GDP. By economic activity, we imply real GDP that will occur around the growth trend of an economy. Now, with respect to the treatment of business cycles, there are again two different views. One comes from the classical economists. Classical economists think that the business cycles are natural occurrences in an economy. The business cycles are optimal responses of economic actors. Therefore, we should do nothing about them, okay? Because they are the outcome of the optimal responses of economic actors, firms, and the consumers. So according to the classical economists, since the business cycles occur naturally in response to the optimizing behavior of the economic actors, the government should not do anything about them. On the other hand, Keynesians take a more active stance and say that government can shorten the length of the business cycle or can temper the fluctuation through policy action, through intervening into the economy through fiscal or monetary policies. Okay, so according to the Keynesians, business cycles are actually a problem. As you will see, the height or the duration of the business cycles is important, and the government can intervene to either shorten the length or shorten the time of the business cycles. So here, I mean, as you see, the real GDP in the economy, this is the business, this is the US case, for example, as you see here, since the mid-1800s, you see how the GDP has fluctuated over time. And as you see after the 1960s, the ups and downs in the economy have gotten smaller and smaller. Now, of course, first we need to understand what a business cycle is. The business cycle has several important points. One is the peak. As you see, the peak is the top point of a business cycle. And we reach the peak after an expansion. Right here, actually, the top of a business cycle is called a peak. And once you reach a peak, eventually the economy will experience a downturn and will enter a recession. And at the end of this recession, you will reach a trough, the lowest point of the business cycle. And of course, after this trough, eventually the economy is also going to recover and enter an upturn phase or an expansion phase. As you see here, the first peak is lower than the second peak. So as you see here, let me show you. As you see, the second peak is a little bit higher than the first peak. As you see, with this, you can say that there is this long-term growth trend in the economy. So as you see, as long as the consecutive peaks are higher than each other, one over the other, the economy will be in a growth trend in the long run, in a secular growth trend. So this is what we call a business cycle. So from here to here, this is one business cycle with an expansion, with a peak, and with a recession, and then with a trough. This is one business cycle. And then the economy starts another business cycle with another expansion, with another peak, another downturn, and another trough. Okay, so naturally, according to the classicals, these happen naturally in response of the optimizing behavior of economic agents. On the other hand, the Keynesians say that, okay, the government should do something about the duration, how long this business cycle takes, and how, for example, how low this trough is. Also, you do not want high peaks and low troughs. Okay, you would like to moderate the business cycles. Okay, you would like to moderate the business cycles, first in terms of length and also in terms of how high it is. So according to the Keynesians, the government should intervene with monetary or fiscal policy, as we will talk about in the coming chapters, of how to fix these problems. Okay. Now, another problem that is more recent, particularly with the global financial crisis of 2008, this has appeared, what we call the structural stagnation. Structural stagnation is a downturn that leads to slow economic growth that prevents the economy from returning its past trend for a long time, unless the structure of the economy changes significantly. So according to structural stagnation, you will remain in a low growth rates for a prolonged period of time, and you will not be returning to your previous long-run trend of growth. So that's, of course, going to cause long-term problems in the economy, such as unemployment, and it might also lead to a depression, which is a deep and prolonged recession. Okay, it might also lead to stagflation, which is the combination of inflation together with stagnation or long-term recession. Okay, so currently the distinction between a business cycle and structural stagnation is in the heart of modern macro policy debates. Okay, so the current modern macro policy debates are dealing with the remedies for long-term structural stagnation. How can we fix long-term unemployment, or how can we fix or find remedies for long-term recessions in the economy? So at this point, let's talk about unemployment. Okay, here we mentioned unemployment is a problem that comes through the recessions, or that comes through the structural stagnation. Now, let's first start with the basics. How can we measure the labor market in an economy? First of all, you will have the general population. In Turkey, it's what, 84 million people. Everybody that would be included in the population, everybody with a Turkish identity card. Okay, that would make up the Turkish population. Now, this population can be divided into non-institutional civilian population and people not eligible for work. Now, what do we mean by non-institutional civilian population? It is the population which is above the age of 15 or 15 and above, which are eligible for work. Second of all, this is the population which is not in mental hospitals, which is not in mandatory military service, or which is not in which is not working for, which is not in the population which is not eligible for work. Okay, so such as the disabled population. Okay, so non-institutional civilian population means this is the working age population which is not in mental hospital, therefore eligible for work, which is not in mandatory military service, for a short time, be it 6 months or be it 1 year, you will be in mandatory military service. And mind you, this is not the population which chooses military work as profession. That's something else. This is only the population which is in the military for mandatory service. On the other hand, there is also the population who is not eligible for work, which would be the children below the age of 15, and people who are in mental hospitals, or people, again, who are in military service, mandatory military service. Now, people who are eligible for work can be categorized into who are in the labor force and those who are not in the labor force. Now, people who are in the labor force will be those who are actually gainfully employed, and those who are waiting to be employed. And those are the people who are unemployed and actively looking for a job. On the other hand, people not in the labor force are either the retired, they can be students over the age of 15, but not working. They can be homemakers, women who, by choice, who do not want to work, right? Mostly the retired people, students, and homemakers by choice who do not want to work and who are not looking for work. On the other hand, people in the labor force are those who are currently employed with wages, or they can be self-employed. Being employed means you can be working part-time, you can be working full-time, or even if you are working for 1 hour a week, and you get wages for it, you are still employed. On the other hand, people who are unemployed are those who are out of a job, who do not yet have a job or who have lost a job, but are still currently actively looking for a job, okay, who want to be employed. People who are not in the labor force, they are not looking for a job, right? They are not wanting to be employed. It's very different from each other. Now, there is one more category here, which is not mentioned, people who are discouraged workers. Now, over time, if you have not been able to find a job while you are unemployed, you might fall out of the labor force, okay? If you fall out of the labor force and become a person not in the labor force, you are a discouraged worker, okay? In Turkey, that's a large problem because being unemployed has a limit, okay? You can be considered unemployed only for a short period of time, like 1 month, okay? After 1 month, if you have not found a job, you become a discouraged worker and you fall out of the labor force. Okay, so here, what is the unemployment rate that we always talk about in the news or in the statistics? That would be the number of unemployed people divided by the number of people in the labor force. As you see, we go one step up. The number of unemployed divided by the people in the labor force. On the other hand, we can also talk about the labor force participation rate, and that would be the number of people in the labor force divided by the the number of people who are eligible for work, or the non-institutional civilian population. As you see here, it is also one step up. So the labor force participation rate will be the number of people in the labor force divided by the number of people in the non-institutional civilian population, okay? Or people eligible for work, 15 and above. Okay, so that's also an indicator of how well the labor markets are doing. First of all, the unemployment rate is an indicator of how well the labor markets are doing, because it shows the ability of the economy to find jobs for those who are actively looking for a job. On the other hand, labor force participation rate shows in the population, how many people are actively employed and actively looking for a job, and which are, of course, able-bodied for work. Now, again, how do we calculate the unemployment rate? We divide the number of people who are employed, who are unemployed by the number of people in the labor force. And labor force is actually the people in an economy who are willing and able to do work, who want to work and actually work. So if the total number of unemployed is 8 million and the labor force is 160 million, so the unemployment rate is 5%. Just divide 8 with 160. Now, this is the situation in Turkey. For example, here we see the red line as the unemployment rate in Turkey. As you see, it has, currently it is about, I think it has been announced as about 11%. This shows a little bit higher than that in 2019. It was about 13% at the time. And here you see some, association between the real GDP growth rate and the unemployment rate. So as you see, at times of slow growth and even negative growth, you see an increase in the unemployment rate. And one important thing about the behavior of the unemployment rate is that once it reaches a high plateau, it will stay in that high plateau for some time. Here we see the data from Turkish economy. As you see, the labor force participation rate in Turkey is about 50%, while the unemployment rate in June 2020, last year was 13%. Now, there are different types of unemployment, actually. We have one unemployment rate to be calculated, but this unemployment rate can be understood in different ways. It can be dissected into different types. One is cyclical unemployment. Now, what is cyclical unemployment? It is the unemployment which results from the fluctuations in economic activity. Basically, the cyclical unemployment occurs when the economy enters a downturn or a recession in the business cycles. So some economists consider the cyclical unemployment to be the short-term unemployment. So when the economy starts to recover, the cyclical unemployment is going to get lower over time. On the other hand, there is another type of unemployment, which is called the structural unemployment, which is a more fundamental problem. And it will be caused by the institutional structure of an economy or by restructuring the economy, making some skills obsolete. Now, what do we imply by that? For example, if you are a secretary who knows only how to use a typewriter, but you do not know how to use a computer, then you will be unemployed structurally, okay? And if you do not want to update your skills over time, you will be structurally unemployed until you update your skills. Or, for example, another example can be that the economy might be starting to use more of natural gas instead of coal in generating energy, electricity. So in that sense, people who work in coal mines, the miners, will be unemployed unless they find new jobs, unless they develop their skills and find new jobs. So this structural change in the economy, moving from generating energy from coal to generating energy to natural gas, is going to cause structural unemployment in the economy. So you can adapt this to many other sectors. You can adapt this to agricultural sector. You can adapt it to any manufacturing sector. You can adapt it to services sector. So there can be occurrences of unemployment due to the structural change in the economy, due to the changes in the institutions, or due to the changes in the preferences. There is another, unemployment types. So we have cyclical unemployment, structural unemployment as major problems, but also there is what we call a frictional unemployment. Now, frictional unemployment is caused by people or workers entering the job markets and people quitting a job just long enough to look for and find another job. So, for example, you are a engineer, but currently you are working in the finance sector, but you want to work as an engineer and use your skills to full efficiency, okay? Because that's your skills are in engineering rather than in finance and banking. So if you quit your finance job and start looking for a job in engineering, hoping that you will be using your skills to their fullest efficiency, you will be frictionally unemployed. So actually, during the time that you are unemployed, you will be frictionally unemployed until you find a job that will fit your skills better. So actually, frictional unemployment is not a bad thing, because that will cause a more efficient use of available resources, that's to say labor in the economy. Right? People will be quitting their jobs for better pay, People will be quitting jobs for jobs that will fit their skills better, or people will be quitting their jobs in order to retrain themselves. Okay, they might be going back to school to get a master's degree, or even they might be going back to school to finish their college degree, so that they will be more efficient in the job that they do. Okay, so frictional unemployment is actually not a bad thing. It will lead to a more efficient use of labor in the economy. So if that is the case, right, if there are people moving in and out of jobs for the purpose of allocating the skills and allocating labor in a much efficient way, we say that the economy is operating at full employment. So actually, full employment is when everybody who wants to work is working, okay? Everybody who wants a job has a job. That's to say, the unemployment that exists in the economy is only frictional unemployment. People who are willing to leave their jobs for a better job, okay? Or for a job that will fit their skills better. So in that sense, you can say that structural unemployment and cyclical unemployment are involuntary unemployment, while frictional unemployment is voluntary unemployment. And when we have frictional unemployment in the economy is actually at full employment and will be producing output at its potential, or will be producing output at full employment level of employment. Okay, so that's it going to be for today's introduction. So actually, we are going to talk about these issues in more detail when the appropriate chapters come about. We are going to talk about the labor market a little bit in more detail, the types of unemployment in a little bit more detail. For the initial introduction, I think this should be sufficient for you. All right, so let me stop for chapter 24 here, and I will be with you in the next chapter's video and lecture notes. Okay, bye-bye for now.